The most important part to any zoo is the animals in the enclosures they call home. Throughout the series, I'll be designing different enclosures for an array of animals, whilst also keeping guest interaction at the forefront of every build. Join me each week as I tackle a new enclosure and idea and try and bring it to life within Planet Zoo. Today I'm building a Binturong and Otter enclosure. This will be the second habitat within the zoo to combine two species, and I think they will go perfectly. Let's look at the stats, and starting off with the otter, as you can see, water is a very important requirement. Land isn't too bad, and of course the species can be found all over. The groups can be quite large as well, although in this habitat we will only have 4 otters, all female. Here are all the different species that an otter can mix with, and there it is at the top, Binturong. So clicking on that and going through to the stats, water isn't important. Obviously they just won't use that within the enclosure, and land requirement is actually even smaller than the otter. Their group sizes as well aren't too big, with 2 to 5 in each group, and in this enclosure we will only have 2 females. Starting the build, I'm doing it a little bit different to the last few I've done. Instead of doing the perimeter, I wanted to make use of the space I've got. So I started by filling in the lake here, and then I wanted to get the apparatus in for the Binturong. The plan was to have a massive walkway go right across the middle of the enclosure so guests could get the best possible view of the animals. I spent a long time trying to get the apparatus right and making sure there was enough of it, as Binturong do like to be high up from the ground. So you'll see a variety of different apparatus that I try, just seeing what works and what fits in this space. Obviously it's not the biggest space in the zoo. This is why I wanted to use it, because realistically the otters would stick to the ground and the Binturongs would live up high, so they wouldn't really be sharing the same space. Hence why I tried to make the most of this small footprint here in the zoo. A first for me in this series, I'm using the advanced move tool. I've used this in Planet Coaster, so I thought I'd give it a go here on Planet Zoo, and it was the best way to make this walkway and make sure it was as straight as possible. Otherwise it would have been quite fiddly to get it across the enclosure, and I didn't want it looking wonky. I wanted it to be a perfect straight line from one platform to the other. With that in, I still wanted to add as many platforms as possible, all at different levels, to get the most out of it. I also used this middle platform here just to give the Binturongs another point of access to this walkway. That's enough on the platforms. It's time to get the wall in, and as you can see, I've already had the back wall in place from a previous build. I decided to use the glass panels within the wall. I quite like these. They're quite smart, and I haven't actually used them that much. And I wanted to get the footpath as close to the wall as possible, and as you can see, I did notice that that apparatus was quite close to the wall, so I did take some of that away just to make a few tweaks, and I didn't want the Binturong getting too high. Of course, if the Binturong were too high, they would be able to get over the wall. Now, this isn't the final height of the wall. I do make the sides slightly higher than the front there. That's because that apparatus is quite close and I don't want them getting out. One thing I will note is, when this enclosure was open to the public and the animals were in, it was the most attention I've had to an enclosure for a long time. I think it was the excitement of having 2 species in one, which is the first since the giraffe and zebras. There is the wall being raised. I did toy with doing it at the front here, and then I thought, no, it takes away from that walkway there and they wouldn't be able to see the animals. This is the last thing I do before getting the animals into the enclosure. That's both species in the enclosure. Now comes the fun part, setting up the final details and making this enclosure look lived in. I did struggle with getting the gradient right on the ground here. It was very nitpicky what exactly they wanted, and I did find that there was just slight different variations for the Binturong and otters, and I found it quite frustrating because the Binturong wouldn't really use the ground as much as the otters. but you know, I had to make do. Another thing I did struggle with as well was trying to get these bedding pieces to attach to the high apparatus. It was just really fiddly, so I found myself having to add more enrichment and bedding space on the ground, which I didn't really want to do because it would take away from the space for the otters, and I didn't think it was fair on them because yes, they have a lot of water space, but they also need some ground space, obviously, to rest away from the water. Next up is one of my favourite parts to any build, and that is adding foliage. I decided to go with the autumn leaves just to add a pop of colour to that ground because it was quite dark. I found this nice foliage here that sort of sat up against the wall and just took away from that. Obviously the guests wouldn't see it a huge amount, but I thought it was nice for the otters and gave it that pop of colour. I also made sure there was some lily pads here in the lake, and that big back wall there, I made sure there was some ivy growing up it just to take away from that brickwork. One of the last things to do was add the bedding here, and obviously that hard shelter for the animals, and they needed a lot of enrichment. Obviously with the two different species, they both require different things. I did find this took up a lot of space within the enclosure, which wasn't ideal, but it all kind of worked out in the end, and there's just about enough room for the keepers to walk through. And this is about where the crowd starts building up around the edge of the enclosure, which you can see, which I just think is fantastic. And by this point the Binturong weren't even using that walkway properly yet, as they were still adjusting to the enclosure. This was my favourite part of the build, adding the screens to the wall. This was exciting because I got to put a different species on each one. Obviously I did get to do this with the giraffe and zebras, but it's been a while since I'd done that, so it was nice to make a little pattern between each, the otter and the Binturong. Overall, I'm really happy with this build, and it's the best use of this space possible and brings a lot more life to this end of the zoo.